Hello, I'm Cheryl Meyer, and I'm otherwise known as Cheryl M. Health Muse. And what my goal is to inspire you to lead a healthier life. So when I proposed my podcast, I proposed that we present it in two different segments. The first one is It Feels Good to Feel Good, Future-Proof Your Health, where I get to share everything I have learned to return my health back to relative wellness and to live a pain-free life in spite of the fact that I have autoimmune disease. But the second part of my podcast is this episode, and that's Tell Me Your Story, the Health Muse is in. My concept with this is it's all fine and well that you hear me tell my story, but I get a lot of, it's all fine and well that it worked for you, but it's not going to work for me. And I wanted you to hear that there are lots of people out there that have made changes in their lifestyle that have supported their health and brought them back to relative wellness. We all have a couple things in common. We all owned our own health. Whatever the doctor was suggesting we did was going on a parallel path to us making these lifestyle changes where we did things that cleaned up our toxic load. We all pay attention to our body. You'll hear jazz in the background because I want you to listen to the rhythm of your health, and I want you to pay attention to what your body is telling you. My body had been trying to tell me that I was going to topple over into toxic load for some time. I just wasn't listening. So if you clean up your lifestyle and if you listen to your body, you have a very good chance not of being deprived in any way, but returning to feeling darn good. And that's what these podcasts are really all about. So thank you for joining me. This is going to be a Tell Me Your Story, the Health Muse is in episode, and I hope you enjoy it. And I hope that we all inspire you to lead a healthier, happier life. Thank you. Hello, welcome to another episode of Tell Me Your Story. And we have a wonderful, wonderful guest today, all the way from Australia. Her name is Kimberly Spenser, and I am so pleased that she wants to share her story because she's somebody who struggled for years with bulimia, but she has come completely out the other end into total health, and she is actually coaching other people to be healthy. And so I'm thrilled to have her tell the story so that anybody out there that's struggling with anything similar can listen to her story and find the hope they need that they too can recover from this condition. So welcome, Kimberly. I am so thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Cheryl. I love that. I thought it was so punny that you said I came out the other end, because that's kind of what bulimia is. You have to get it going back so that the peristalsis goes the normal way instead of having it go out this end. So I appreciated the humor in that. I always love a good pun.
Unconscious humor, but good. So welcome.
It is a pleasure to be here.
It's so inspiring what you have done. So I'm going to let you go ahead and tell your story, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation as we go.
Yeah, so I backtrack even before bulimia, because it's like eating disorders aren't just born in you. Like what happened was I had no training tools or capability or resources or learning as to how to deal with emotions. I grew up in a home, and my dad was an addict for all of my life until recently. Back in 2016, I staged his intervention, and since then he has been sober off of alcohol since 2016, and then sober off of opioids and painkillers since last year when he went to rehab for that. And so that was a beautiful transformation, proving that at any age you can transform your life, because he's now 73 and he had been an addict for 50 years. So I'm super proud of him. But when I was growing up, that wasn't the same. That wasn't the case. And so my dad was drinking, and I like to say that I had four dads. I had the pain pill popping dad. I had the alcoholic dad who was quite an asshole. And I had the pothead dad who was just kind of like numb and laid back and just didn't care. And then I had the sober dad, and the sober dad was really awesome. He was really cool. But basically all of what his addictions were, they were masking emotions. Like, and my mom also never really, like, she was codependent, yes, and she went to codependency rehab as well, which was great because she learned to start to speak up for herself and her needs and her wants. But growing up, she masked her needs, her wants, and any feelings that were something that weren't logical, something that you couldn't put, a process to, she just didn't want to deal with them. She just would stick her head in the sand and she's like, oh, you're feeling something? Oh, okay. Let's just pretend like it's okay. Let's just, bury it. And so I never really grew up with any tools or resources as to how to process my feelings. And I didn't realize, I now look back and I'm very grateful because I think that we are blessed to our parents to teach them things as children, to help them remember certain things that they may have been conditioned out of or had some plagiarized programming around. Just like with my son, I learned so much from him. I mean, I've worked with some amazing coaches, but there's been no one better than my toddler to teach me some lessons. And so we're blessed with children that allow us to see parts of ourselves that maybe we wouldn't have wanted to see. And we can either repeat the cycle of conditioning and plagiarized programming, or we can shift it and break that cycle. And so for me, I started out with being a part of the cycle of having these big emotions, having lots of anger. I had lots of anger as a child, and it's not really a pretty emotion for a little girl, especially a little girl who dresses up in princess outfits. And I remember I would have parties where I would get, like, have friends over where I would get angry. I would get angry because I would notice that there was hypocrisy. Like, that's the big thing that really is a trigger for me, is hypocrisy of seeing, my dad come home drunk, and then we have, like, me being the problem for pointing it out. And I'm like, wait, that's wrong. That's not right. Like, that's not the problem, is my feeling. The problem is this addiction. And so that hypocrisy made me very angry, right? So that hypocrisy made me very angry in many ways. And I was conditioned to not feel those feelings. Like, I was trained that those were bad feelings. And whenever I would get angry, then we would have, like, my parents were very religious. They still are. And we would have to pray over my anger issues. And I was like, I don't think that this is right. Like, I don't think that this is right. And so what bulimia is bulimia became a way of me to try to figure out how to feel all these feelings, how to navigate the world, how to have some semblance of control in an environment of addiction where you feel very powerless in many ways, especially when you feel like you're not able to say anything, or like you start to feel like, am I the crazy one who's noticing that the emperor has no clothes? Like, is it me? And so bulimia was my way of controlling all of those thoughts. And so it didn't start out like I didn't one day decide to become bulimic, but it started out with just starting dieting. I think I started dieting around like 8 or 9 years old, because I would see my dad when he would go off of an addiction, and he would work really hard, and he's a hard worker, and he would work really hard to go off of an addiction. He knew that what he was doing was not right, and he would work really hard to go off of it. And so what he would do is he would then deflect his emotions and stuff and what he used to use the addiction of alcohol or substances for, and he would deflect to using, like, controlling his body. So he would go on fasts, he would go on major diets, like restrictive diets. And so I learned a pattern of restrictive dieting. And so I started at 9. I was like, well, apparently fasts, like, are good, and this is something that I should do. And so I would do, like, go for a couple days without eating, and then I would be like, well, screw that, I'm really hungry. so I would, it doesn't make sense to me. And I was looking for any way to to have something make sense. And I was back then, I was training to become a dancer. And my dance teacher was prepping me to go to Joffrey Ballet School and doing their summer season. And she said to me, she was the first person who pointed out, like, oh, Kim, I was about 9 or 10 and I was a bit of an early developer. She said, if you stop eating around like 4 p.m., like it'll help like with any bloating and stuff like that. And I was like, I didn't know you could be bloated. Am I bloated? And I would have, I had a kid's tummy. Like I didn't have the best diet in the world. My mom's not the best cook. And so I ate a lot of McDonald's growing up, and like that, I said, oh, okay. It didn't really make sense to me, but I started hearing all these like plagiarized programming. It's what I call plagiarized programming, which is like, it's somebody else's limiting belief that you just adopt as your own. And so I remember one day, what?
It was given to you as if it was absolute truth.
Yeah. And so you adopt it as your own, and then that's what kind of becomes your truth, but it's not. Like, I think it's the masks that we wear. And so I was looking for some way to have something make sense. And I remember I was on the couch one day, and I was really what I was looking for was peace, was self-love, was acceptance of myself, acceptance of others. I found it very hard to accept things that I wouldn't tolerate, like addiction or hypocrisy. Like I found it very hard to accept that people were doing the best that they could with the resources that they had. Just some people have some pretty crappy resources. And what happened was, I remember I was like 9 years old, and I had just come off of like a fast where I hadn't eaten, and then I just binged. And so I got very used to binging. And I saw this commercial on TV that was like, have vitamins and be healthy. And my mom's always been like a health nut to some degree. She's always taken tons of vitamins. And so I remember taking this fistful of vitamins, and one of them got stuck in my throat. And if you've ever had that feeling, it's like, oh, yeah, awful. It's awful. And so I was like not sure what I should do. And I went to the bathroom, and that was the first time I threw up. But after I threw up, it was not only the vitamins that I threw up, but it was all of the food that I had like just shoved down. It was all this pain. It was all this emotion. It was all the stuff. And for the first time after I vomited, I remember the feeling as I stood in the bathroom of this like feeling of peace that I had. And it was momentary, but I was like, oh, that's what this feels like. I felt like I had some sort of control. And so then within a year, I was fully bulimic. And I was that way throughout my childhood up until I was about 17, 18. When I was 16 years old, I told my parents, and I said, I think I have this problem. And I said, I throw out my food sometimes. I didn't say it was every day like it was, or every meal like it was, but I said, I think I have this problem. And my mom got very concerned. My dad didn't really. He was like, oh yeah, I've done that a few times. And I was like, okay, okay, so there's another addiction. So, okay, cool. So my mom was concerned though. And I remember because one time we were at the dinner table, and it was very rare for us to ever eat around the dinner table. But it was one day that we were sitting at the dinner table, and I went upstairs to go do my homework. And that wasn't like a lie or anything. I was a very good student. I was a high achiever, perfectionist, always believing that I wasn't smart enough, good enough. So I was always trying to prove how smart I was, prove how good enough I was with my grades. And so I went upstairs to go do my homework, but before that I had a pit stop. And I was crossing the hallway to go to the bathroom. And as I open the door, I hear this like thud, 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 thud. And it's my mom barreling up the stairs. And we got into the most epic fights of Game of Thrones style. I was railing like a wild animal to like have this moment of peace and like to let this stuff go, to let it out of me. Because that was the only way that I knew how to process and feel my emotions, was to just bury it down and then spew it back up. And that experience, my mom ended up wrestling me to the floor, and she sat on me and she said, Kim, I love you. I am not going to let you kill yourself. And that was the moment where I realized an eating disorder is a slow form of suicide, and I wanted to live. And so it was in that moment that I started looking at, okay, maybe it was, that I've always had this really deep connection with intuition, of knowing, of a deep knowing when I know that there's something I need to follow. And so I started getting curious. I didn't think I had to have the right answers, because I didn't even know what the answers were. I didn't know how to get healthy. I didn't know how to have a body that I loved, because I hated and punished my body for years.
You're really thin as a result?
No, that's the other lie, is bulimia doesn't work. It makes your face fat because all the bile gets trapped up in your jawline. Like I wasn't fit. I wasn't really thin. No one would have known that I had a problem, except for the fact that people would notice at lunchtimes, oh, you have some weird eating habits. Like sometimes I would skip lunches. Sometimes I would just like say, oh, well, I'm not really hungry. And I would just sit with like a plate of food, and I would be punishing myself. Like subconsciously, that was what I was doing, was I would be sitting there punishing myself for having purged, or I would sit there punishing myself for, like, I had all of these complicated rules that would allow me to feel good in my body. So that's the thing that I've found over not only the decade that it took me to recover from bulimia, but then after bulimia, I became a certified Pilates instructor, because Pilates was the first form of exercise I found that actually made me feel really freaking good in my body. And I'd never felt that before. And I said, whatever this is, I said, I need to teach this, because I need to help other people feel this good in their body. And I was still, not 100% recovered back then, but I still knew that I had this desire to serve and to help people. And I also back then wanted a job so that I could move out. So that paid well. I didn't want to wait tables or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with waiting tables, but I wanted to set my own schedule. I wanted to have a little bit more autonomy. I've never been the type of person that does well with a boss. So I've always liked being the boss of myself, which is why I have my own company now. But that experience of going and starting to teach Pilates, what I realized was that it never was about the body. It never was about, whether someone ate healthy or whether someone didn't, whether someone was technically fat or technically thin, whether someone worked out 3 times a day or like 3 times a week or 3 times a month. What mattered was how they thought about their body. And I saw how powerful our thoughts were into shaping our identity, and how powerful our environments were into shaping our identity and our belief systems. Because what happened was, as soon as I started teaching Pilates, I was teaching people for 10 hours a day, different people with different backgrounds, with different experiences, of different genders, of different races, of different belief systems, of different religions. And I was able to see a different way of living. Because what happens is, when your brain is on survival mechanism, when your brain is in this survival space of fight or flight, and your amygdala is going on overdrive, you're looking to anyone as to how do you survive in this world, especially as a child, which is why a lot of our subconscious programming is kind of set as a child until we choose to look at what we want to choose into and what we want to take out. And when I looked at my programming, when I looked at like what I had learned as a child, now looking back, I see like there were all these belief systems that I had chosen into, like repressing my emotions, burying them, eating them up, swallowing them, and then having them spew out at some point, which was exactly what my dad did with his addictions. That pattern was a pattern that was learned. It was not a pattern that was unconsciously adopted at the time to survive. So the beauty was, when I removed myself from the environment of the house that I grew up in with my parents, and I started seeing how other people live and survive and have thrived and have gotten to the point where they're, making good money, having amazing relationships, or not. Like I trained some people that were lovely hot messes as well, and seeing like, okay, well, what are they thinking? It allowed me to have perspective of different beliefs that maybe I could change my personality. Maybe I could change the person who I thought I was, because The person who I thought I was back then was broken, damaged, a victim. I was stuck blaming my dad. And the one thing that shifted my progress into full recovery was I stopped blaming everyone else for my bulimia. I stopped blaming my dad because it wasn't his finger shoving down my throat, it was mine. And I had to take ownership of that, that whatever happened in the past, it's in the past. And the past can't be changed. Your perspective of the past can be. And I had to change my perspective of the past, of blaming my parents for all of my stuff, and instead take ownership that I was the one who was punishing my body. I was the one who was allowing my boundaries to be walked over. I was the one who was believing she wasn't good enough. I wasn't claiming that I was. And I had to step into that place where I claimed who I was and who I wanted to be, instead of just allowing other people's perceptions to define it for me. And when that changed, and my computer apparently agrees, that was the changing moment. But it was a practice of leaning into that choice. It was a practice of choosing to see my body differently, of choosing it not to see it as a damaged, broken person, of choosing to look in the mirror and actually start saying, like, what do I love about this? And that's one of the things that I loved about training Pilates, was that in the doing of Pilates, I found a way of teaching, and teaching myself as well, that when I'm engaging, to fully be engaged in that moment. And so my body knows, and my body is sending me signals, and my brain is getting the message, you're doing enough. You're good. You feel that shake? And I would do that when I would be training a client who would also come to me with body image issues. I had a ton of clients that actually came to work with me just because I was authentic and vulnerable about my experience.
Well, that's what you were attracting, and that makes sense.
Yeah. And it makes sense that I would attract that. I attracted people who I had people choose me as their instructor over another instructor, because they're like, well, one, you challenged me, because I've always loved a good challenge. And I'm like, I won't challenge you to do anything that I won't do. If I tell you to do 10 more, guess what I'm doing in my workouts is I'm doing 10 more. So I won't challenge you to do something that I won't do myself. I also know that people would come to me because they'd had the body image issues, and they didn't identify or relate with somebody who's like, I've never had anything wrong with my body. I've always loved working out. I've always eaten healthy. I'm like, I used to drive through, eat McDonald's every single day and have a giant venti frappuccino every afternoon after high school. That I was like, my diet was crap. It was pure crap. And that's
also authentic, and people pick that up.
Well, it comes, I think authenticity also comes with you owning your mistakes. Okay. And that perfectionist side that was really a lot of the bulimia for me, the desire to be perfect, really comes from that fear of not being enough. And from that desire to be perfect, that was a lot of what was causing a lot of my problems. So I shifted from a desire to be perfect to instead, what if I just accepted myself as I am? What if and this was the big changing moment for me with reprogramming my mindset from bulimia, was what if I accepted the fact that I just threw up my food? Instead of judging it, instead of beating myself up about it, instead of being hard on myself that I messed up again, what if I just accepted it? And then what if from that place of acceptance, I actually learned something? What if I actually, what is it that I need to learn? And so when I started finally accepting the choices that I was making and the results that I was getting, when I finally accepted it, then that was when I was able to change and question it and look at it from different angles and perspectives. But what happens is when you're not accepting it, when you're not allowing yourself to accept, like I was working with one client recently, very successful businesswoman. And we were working on how her self-worth was being projected into her business. And she wasn't really taking care of herself. She would just always like shovel food in her mouth and just kind of like race around and was always busy, was always stressed out. And I said, you know, we were working on developing self-care, but she wasn't being accountable to herself. And I had to call her out on it as her coach. And I said, I got to ask you this question. And it's okay if you say no. I say, but answer it honestly. Is this a time in your life right now where you actually want to care for yourself, where you actually want to take care of yourself? And she was like, Kim, you know, I got to tell you, I know I should say yes. And I said, but what really do you want to say? And she goes, no. And I said, at least with that, we can work with that. We can't work with you shoulding on what you should do or should be doing, or you know you should be doing because you're smart. But we can work with the acceptance of that no. That doesn't mean you're going to stay at a no for forever. It just means that if you accept the fact that right now you're at a no, then that's a place where you can move forward from choice.
Mind shift begins to happen.
Yeah.
Is admitting it.
Yeah.
Reminding me of, which is a totally different subject, but I quit smoking 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I got autoimmune disease. After not smoking for a long time, I had just started smoking again. And I sat down and why can I not quit smoking? It was because I was trying to give something up. And
yeah.
I was just going to be a smoker who chose not to smoke. And do you know, since then, I have never smoked again.
Yep.
It wasn't giving anything up. It was a whole mindset shift that I didn't want to be a smoker. And I had to accept that I was a smoker. I just was going to choose. I didn't want to be there.
Yeah. And it is a massive mindset shift, because I had to accept that I was bulimic. I also could accept in that moment, by accepting that, I could accept that I wouldn't be that way for the rest of my life.
Right.
That wasn't my destiny. But you have to accept the things that you don't even like about yourself in order to change them. You cannot change anything that you haven't accepted.
No, and you can't run away from them because they go with you.
And you can't should or supposed to yourself out of them, because that's not living in actual reality. So, and I have this in my business too, and with my business clients, that like when they are struggling with getting a monetary result, that they're like, why haven't I gotten this yet? I should be at this. I'm supposed to have this many clients, or this, da-da-da-da. I'm like, yeah, you should. Maybe you're supposed to, but where are you now? Like, where are you now? How can you accept where you are now? Because that's actually the starting line. I like to think of it like a marathon. Is you can be driving around in your should car looking at the race course and saying, oh, I should be at mile 18 by now. But you're not. You're at mile 2. Like, and actually, if you're driving around in the should car, you haven't even started the race. You have to get out and start at that starting line and move from mile 1 to mile 2 to mile 3. And it's a practice and a process.
And you didn't get any therapy to bring yourself to these realizations, right?
Not in traditional therapy, no. I got cranial sacral therapy, which is a form of tissue energy healing. And it was through that cranial sacral therapy work that really helped speed up the healing. Because I had to heal the tissue in my body first as well. Because I remember one session that I was in, and I was on the table with my cranial sacral therapist, and she was working on my throat. And I started to feel like massive burning in my esophagus. And she goes, yeah, that's your tissue thanking you for those like 10 years of bile that you were vomiting up. But it was the repairing process. And I started cranial sacral therapy out of a very strange circumstance. I had one client who had fibromyalgia, And I'd been working with her in Pilates, and between Pilates and cranial, she'd been making improvements with her body and with her pain levels. And then I had a very strange experience where I was at a movie theater. For some reason, I thought I was the genius who thought, yeah, let's take out pho and take it into a movie theater. So I spilled scalding hot pho on my thighs. The paramedics had to come and cut off my pants. Where at the same time, that same movie theater, my then boyfriend was there with the other woman that he was also dating that I didn't know about, who was at that same experience. So I like to think of, like, there's so much in life that is a metaphor, and I don't believe anything happens by accident. That I saw that and I was like, whoa, I got deeply burned in my thighs, and I was getting burned emotionally by the first love of my life. And I was like, okay. So I was able to connect that. And I went to my client because I'd gone to the dermatologist, and he was like, I don't know what to tell you. That's a 2nd-degree burn. And I was like, I cannot have a 2nd-degree burn the size of 2 of my handprints on my thigh, period. I was back then I was doing pageants. I was doing some modeling, and I was like, I'm not even available for that. So as soon as I'm a very decisive person, when I decide I'm not available for something, I seek out every other answer possible. I seek out all the options. And so my client pointed out, she said, oh, well, why don't you give my cranial sacral therapist a try? And so I did. And I remember that was our first appointment. I felt my thigh re-burning. And I went back to the dermatologist the day later, and he said, what did you do? He said, I've never seen tissue heal this fast, and you're not going to scar. What did you do? And I said, I did cranial sacral therapy. And I said, well, if it worked for that, maybe it can work for like the insides and for healing the physical parts of me that I'd abused and that had been abused. So that was the only form of therapy that I did receive, but it wasn't traditional talk therapy. And that I did that for a decade, and it really, really served in my progress. And she was basically like one of my first coaches.
Wow, that's amazing. And the fact that you came to all these conclusions on your own and then pursued them, that says a lot about you and who you are.
Yeah, it comes down, like, for me, I've always had that deep knowing. And like when my gut really says, yeah, like, do this, even if it sounds crazy, I'll do it. Like staying in the Gold Coast in the middle of a pandemic. Like, that even if it sounds crazy, I lean into it. And that's exactly what happened with how we wound up being in Australia. Was my husband was appearing here at a convention, and we just we saw what was happening with COVID. We saw how the United States was handling it. We saw everyone was basically going into lockdown. And I said, well, we could go back to Los Angeles and go into lockdown and be there, or we could do it here and have a beach as our backyard that we can walk on every day and run on every day. And I said, it just was such a no, it was that gut instinct of like, this seems crazy and let's do it. And that same curiosity of like, oh, wait, go ahead.
You could do Pilates anywhere. So your business could be.
Yeah. And I don't teach Pilates as much anymore. I actually just started bringing it back into my coaching with high performance because of what Pilates does for full engagement for the body. So, I mean, I have coaching clients around the world, and my schedule is great by being here because I get to work with all my US clients in the morning, and then I get to work with all my UK clients in the evening. And in the afternoons, I get to be a mom. And in the Gold Coast, everything's back to pretty much normal. And my son's able to go to normal school, and he's able to, go out on long beach walks and go to the park and play and see other kids. And that kid he's an extrovert. He needs to be around other children. So him being alone, cooped up in the house by himself, like that wasn't serving him. And so it really manifested into working out for the highest and best for everybody, for our family. And that's something that happens, I think, when you lean into that unconscious knowing, because it was through teaching Pilates for over a decade that turned me into mindset coaching, that now turned me into the holistic high performance coach that I am today, because I now can look at it I look at business from a perspective of building systems in the body. I look at the systems, the relationships that we have with ourselves, the relationships that we have with money, the relationships that we have with our, interpersonal relationships. And I'm able to look at, relate to things in a different way because of the experiences that I went through, because of the bulimia. Like, I didn't realize that until 2016, because I started my business I could say I started my business back in 2014, but I was very much a dabbler. I was dabbling in my business for about a year and a half. And then I found out that I was pregnant. And what I found was I had repeated the same bulimic thought patterns in my financial and business life that I used to have a decade ago. And so what the beauty was that as I've been writing my book and finishing that, it's allowed me to look at how money and food are so very similar, and how we look at money and our bank accounts and how we look at our body is very similar. And when I saw the same bulimic thought patterns, not that I was wanting to throw up, let me just be clear about that, because I have not thought that thought since I was 21 again, and I'm 33 now. But that the bulimia of financial bulimia, where I would get money in and then I would spew it back out. It would go immediately right back out to bills, to projects, to things that I was working on. It always felt like I never had money to sit and nourish me and nourish my body and nourish my business and nourish my self-care. And it was the same thought pattern that I had with food, where food didn't nourish me. I would just shove it down, and I eventually got to the point where I could consume so much, and then it would eventually come back up. And I see the same pattern with business owners, where they are able to just receive more and more and more and more money because they're able to sell and close more and more and more sales. But they receive that, but that money doesn't stay and nourish their bank accounts. It immediately goes out to bills, to employees, to other things. So it's not actually staying and nourishing and growing and investing in their bank accounts. The same is true for food. And it's because of what I went through with bulimia that I'm able to see these parallels energetically and look at what are the beliefs that are causing that purging, whether it's a physical purging of food or whether it's a financial purging. I mean, I was working with a client just a couple days ago, and she was always overwhelmed. And I was like, how are you more overwhelmed? You just hired a new person for your team, and you say now you have even more work? I said, it's like you're filling your plate up and then you're eating it halfway, and then you're going back to the buffet and filling your plate up so that you can clean your plate. And I said, I'm just curious, did you grow up with the belief that you needed to clean your plate? And were you taught that by your parents? And she was like, oh my gosh, yeah. And she goes, and then I was taught that, you have to go back for seconds in order to please the other person and let them know how much you love their meal. So I was like, do you realize you're doing the same thing with your relationship with your productivity in your business? And she's like, oh, I do the same thing. And she did the same thing in her eating, where she would, she wouldn't just sit down with a pint of ice cream and have a couple bites. She would sit down and eat the whole thing. Like, it would have to all be eaten. And that's why she was constantly in this state of overwhelm. And so being able to look at that and see how the pattern just had manifested itself in different forms. And that's the thing about a deeper subconscious pattern and the way that you think about things, is that a pattern, it doesn't necessarily stick to one form. So for example, my beliefs that I had when I was bulimic, about not being enough, about not being deserving of having a really amazing results in my body, of punishing myself for the choices that I would make, and hating on myself and beating myself up about that. Well, what happened after I healed my relationship with my body? I no longer work out to punish myself. I work out because I absolutely love myself. I work out to feel good, the problem was those beliefs weren't entirely handled, those deeper subconscious beliefs. And so they re-emerged in my romantic relationships. And I got into some relationships that I was abused and where I was punished for, talking to, being friendly with other people. Like I was and I saw, I remember seeing, oh my God, like that pattern is repeating of like those old beliefs, and I recognized it there. And then what happened when I figured out my relationships and was like, okay, I'm done with not being authentic in relationships, with people pleasing and trying to appease other people's standards of what a relationship is, just like I had tried to appease what other people's standards of what beauty is and what a beautiful body is. Back when I was bulimic, I then shifted it into my first e-commerce business. And so those beliefs again came up of not being enough, of trying to prove myself, trying to punish myself, and like overworking myself. Like I was so stressed in that business. My hair was falling out. I would wake up at 3 a.m. in a panic attack with to answer customer service emails. It was not a healthy way of living, and it was because of those old beliefs. So I don't believe that it's a new level, new devils. It's new levels, same devils. They're just coming back in a different form, in a different way. And if you can recognize when those old devils come back, you can assess them and basically go, oh, cool, awesome. Okay, that deserving thing is back. All right, awesome. Let's see what new thing we can learn from that today. Like, oh, that trying to prove yourself and not being enough thing is back. Okay, cool. Like, let's see how we can, I call it the Shanghai shit shift. I just envision like karate chopping it to get it, to have it be, to karate chop the learning lessons out of it so you can understand what the lesson is in it that will allow you to emerge faster and to grow faster. Because when you question those beliefs instead of accepting them as true, that is when I started to make the most progress. And that is when my clients, when I train them in our sessions to start questioning when those old patterns come up, when those old crappy beliefs come up, is question it. Is it possible that this is not true? Like, is it possible that is it ultimately true that this is true? Because if it's ultimately true, then it's true for everyone. But if it's not ultimately true, then that means it's a belief. And beliefs are like pieces of clothing, where it's a wardrobe, it's an identity, and that can be shifted and changed. And that's the power of your mindset, is that you can transform. It's not just like, and this is where I got into a little bit of some beef with, for lack of a better word, with the eating disorder community, because I was doing a lot of speaking for and PR for eating disorder events and cultivating eating disorder awareness. And there was this perception that I saw and this belief inside that community that once you are recovered, like, there's recovery, but you're always going to be in recovery. Like, it's like and it's almost, recovery to me feels like something that you can always slip back into that problem.
Right.
And I'm like,
yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm unavailable for that. Like, no. So I believe that you can transform and transcend beyond, so that's not even a thing. Like, I haven't even thought about throwing up my food. Like, even the idea of that, like, it's just like, why? Like, why would I do that? Why would I do that to my body? No way. Like, and that's the beauty of the transformation, of when you can transform and honor the process. Like, it didn't take me. It didn't happen overnight. It took, I think it was a process of about 2 to 3 years of really honoring the learning stages that I went through. And once I knew that I was in the learning stages, that changed. Yeah.
You're not going back.
Yeah. There's like, why would I? That would be, yeah, that would be complete. And like, it's almost like there's a different person.
Right.
Like, I look back on that girl, that version of me, and I see her in pictures, because God bless Facebook, they just bring up all your memories from time to time. And I'm like, oh, wow. I remember that girl with her jet black hair trying to, be dark and like show how hurt and how wounded she'd been, and how improve her victimhood. Like, I remember when I used to fight for my own limitations. And there's no way I'm doing that now, not as a mom, hell no. Like I like to say I'm a warrior for possibility. So there is no way on this planet that I would ever go back to being that person who used to fight for her limitations.
Yep. Nope. I hear you completely.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic that you came out the other end and you know that you are limitless in what you can do.
The body is a magical, magical vessel. And it's like more and more science is proving how not only our bodies can shift and change and regenerate, I think, faster, like, and it comes from partly changing how our emotional state affects our physiology. And so when you're in an emotional state of a victim mindset, and I want to be very clear that there is a difference between being a victim of an experience like rape or abuse or physical abuse or whatever. Like there's a difference between being a victim and having a victim mindset. For me, I let those experiences from my past define who I was, which was a victim mindset, because then that causes that experience to be the thing that transformed you. And thus you're living with that thing every single day and blaming that thing and it's and complaining about it. Like, and I realized this when I went through my buyout with my e-commerce business, because I was bought out of my e-commerce business back in 2014. And then I had a year and a half where I was basically dabbling with Crown Yourself. And it was because I was in this cycle of blame and shame and comparison, blaming my former business partner for buying me out, blaming, just like I blamed my dad for my body stuff. And eventually I had to get to that place of ownership where I was like, yeah, Kim, you were bought out. And that was a year and a half ago. So whose responsibility has it been to grow this business?
Yeah, it's like
not your former, yeah, it's not his, it's yours. And eventually, and personal responsibility and taking ownership, it ain't sexy. Like no one likes to be in the hot seat where they're wrong. But at the same time, you cannot change without being in the place of accepting that you are where you are right now because of you.
Right.
And then allowing change to come from that.
Yeah, no, I actually have never been much of a victim. And I don't even really believe much in failure. It's just an opportunity to find another way to get around the wall. And
yeah,
that's where growth comes from. And that's a great thing. So
yeah.
My doctor told me I needed mental therapy because she didn't know what was wrong with me. I said, I got news for you. There's something wrong with me, and I'm going to go find it, and I'm going to go fix it. She looked at me like I had landed from Mars. But I don't do that necessarily in all aspects of my life. But when it came to my health, I was not going to accept that from somebody. I was not going to pain and pills. I just wasn't.
Yep. I did the same thing when I had been like just so heart set on having a natural childbirth and doing it the way that we've given birth for millions of years. And so I figured and I went to a doctor to get my ultrasound, and he looked at me and he goes, I don't know what you're going to do. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, your baby's healthy, but your placenta is totally covering your cervix. So if you gave birth naturally, you would bleed out and die. And I was like, thanks for the pep talk. So, so I said, well, it's early. So what is the chance of that placenta moving? And he said, I don't know. I'm going to give it a 50-50. And I was like, great. And he was like, what do you mean great? I was like, oh, I'd take those odds in Vegas 100%. 50-50? Hell yeah, let's do it. And I came back 8 weeks later, and I did, between then and that next appointment, I did 8 weeks of meditation, mindfulness. I took some Chinese herbs as recommended by my midwife to warm up my body to move the placenta. And within 8 weeks, I went back to the same doctor and he was only my ultrasound doctor. He wasn't like going to deliver the baby. Had he been in that spot, I would have fired him. But I eventually started to get to the point where I loved him so much because I called him Dr. Always Wrong, because he was always wrong. Because I went back and and he saw it. He's like, what did you do? And I was like, mindset meditation and some Chinese herbs. And he was like, your placenta's like, it's completely moved. And I was like, yeah, I know. I just knew. And because I was not going to be available for it to not move, period. Like I knew I needed to have a natural childbirth for my son for some reason. And I knew that I also needed to have a natural childbirth for myself. Because after teaching Pilates for 10 years, I had rehabbed so many women from C-section, diastasis recti, and all of the things that go along with childbirth. And I was like, I know that when you have a C-section, you ain't feeling those abdominal muscles anymore. And I just wasn't available for that. So I said, I'm going to have a natural childbirth and I'm going to get my body back. And I remember I had a client at the time and she was like, Kim, aren't you scared about losing the baby weight? I was like, why? No, I was like, no, not at all. Like, I know I'll lose it. I just knew. And it's that trust and certainty in your ability to figure it out.
Right.
And I think that when you can cultivate that trust and that certainty within yourself, that is something that makes you unshakable and unbreakable to no matter what life throws at you. That you know that you can figure it out no matter what, no matter whether it's a problem in your business or a problem in your finances or a problem in your marriage or a problem in, your health. Like when you cultivate that trust with yourself that like, and you hold that firm boundary that you are unavailable for anything less than what it is that you want. Period.
Yeah.
And then with that decisiveness, it changes the game for your mindset.
You figured that out at a very young age. I was much older when I figured that out. But when I started researching, I had no doubt that I was going to find it. I was going to be able to do what it was and I was going to fix it.
Exactly. It's that trust of having our ability to figure it out. And I love one of my mentors, Marie Forleo. She has a book that's Everything is Figure Outable. And like the only one thing that's not figure outable is how to like come back to life after you're dead. That's basically a universal law. But everything else, unless it's a universal law, it can be figured out. You can find a way. You can find a way to make it work for you. I mean, I've just been reading in, my son has this like Wright brothers book. And in the book, it says like back in 1903, they flew the first plane, right? And they went to the newspapers and the newspapers didn't say anything about it. They thought they were lying because scientists back then believed that nobody would ever be able to fly. And I'm like, science is mercurial. It can be wrong. And it can be like what people used to do, what doctors used to do, what diets were recommended back in the 1800s and 1900s, like is now totally disputed as being truth. But back then they held that as truth. And so it's about really allowing yourself to have the curiosity to question what is somebody else's doctrine toward you. Allow yourself to have the curiosity to question your own responses. Because sometimes when you have that natural, like triggered response, sometimes when you're like, whoa, okay, that was a bit curt. That was a bit over the top. That was a bit much for of a response and what was really warranted for this situation. It's kind of like taking a step outside of yourself and watching the movie of yourself and being like, huh, that's an interesting reaction that actor had in that scene. Like, why was that reaction so big? And being able to question that and ask those questions and have that curiosity to question what it is that you think you know.
All those people who came before you.
Yeah.
That will get you where you want to be and not letting anything stop you from doing that.
Yeah. And just being unavailable to not get what you want, in essence. And
which is essentially saying you were not about to settle for anything, for what you were.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a motto and a belief that I live by is that I I am unavailable for anything less than profit and prosperity. Like, I am unavailable for anything less than that. I am unavailable for anything less than ultimate health and ultimate wealth and the most amazing relationships. Because it just sets that boundary and that standard for what I look for. And so, and one of the things that I teach with my clients in their businesses, as well as in their life, is when you know those values of what you stand for. Like for me, in my company, ownership is a value. And we own when we mess up. Like, we own it. Like when we have when we have a broken link or something like that, like we own it, and we reward that awareness of figuring it out together, because that's what we're doing. Is I too don't believe in failure, because I used to believe in failure. It's a belief I no longer have anymore because it didn't serve me. So when I look back at it, and if you're looking at how do I question these beliefs, how do I question, or how do I know what is a belief that I need to question? Well, look at like, what are the results that you're getting? Why do you think that you're getting those results? And that right there, that why will give you a belief.
Yeah, and I don't figure it out
or
somebody up. I want to figure it out so we can change it and move on.
Exactly. Like, bulimia is something I have completely moved on from. And the reason I circled back to writing about it for my book, Mindful Meals, is that I was actually on a call with my coach, and she told me, she said her daughter came out letting her know that she was throwing up her food. And she said, Kim, I need you to write this book for my daughter. And I was like, okay. So I know that other people are struggling with their body image, with how they think about their body, with how they perceive their body, how they love on their body. And really it comes back to, are you operating in your body from a place of fear or from a place of love and trust? Because that's really what it came down to. Because for me, I had all these fears about my body, about not being skinny enough, about not looking the right way, about having love handles, or not having perfect toning or whatever, or not being the beliefs that, like, if I had this body, then I'd be able to feel this way. If I have this body, then I'd be able to do these things that I want to do. And eventually all of that is just conditioned beliefs. All of those are just beliefs. And eventually I said, well, what if I just instead felt that way right now? What if I just bypassed the if then and just started thinking about, how could I feel that way now? How could I feel good in my body now? And how could I, like, what would really make me feel good? And sometimes it is going for a really good workout. Sometimes it is having a really delicious salad. And sometimes it is enjoying the sweet potato fries with some ketchup. It's asking yourself and being honest and grounded with yourself, and having the trust in your body that your body isn't going to betray you, in essence. Because that's something that I've seen with a lot of my clients and that I had as well, is I had this feeling that if I ever did anything that was not on my diet, that was a bad food, which, by the way, like, labeling food as immorality is a whole other topic for a whole other day. But like, I steer very clear of my verbiage and my language when it comes to labeling food with morality, which is like good or bad. But eating something that was not on my diet, I used to have this belief and this perception that my body would betray me. Well, what happens? Your subconscious mind, it does not process negatives, and it basically tells you, it goes where you tell it to go. So, and your subconscious mind is running your body. It is beating your heart. It is breathing your lungs. It is listening to, it's keeping you alive, and it's listening to everything that you're saying and everything that everyone is saying around you. So be careful who you're surrounding yourself with.
Oh yeah.
And that, when I saw that, and I saw this common belief that, oh, I used to believe that if I had a piece of cake, then suddenly 5 pounds would magically come on out of nowhere. And that's normally what would happen. I was like, whoa, how did I gain 5 pounds from one piece of cake? And I would blame, it goes back to that blame, that energy of blame and deflection on the cake. And instead of just saying, well, what am I telling my body to do? I was telling my body to I was, go ahead.
Yeah, you were telling your body to gain 5 pounds.
Yeah. So, I mean, and because I was saying that, like, that's what happened. Your subconscious mind, it doesn't, the beauty of it is that it follows your clear, explicit instructions. It's like a toddler. Like, I don't tell my son to not do something because I know that if I tell him, don't throw the ball in the house, that ball is going to be clear across the room in about 2 seconds. Because your subconscious mind, it doesn't process negative. So start telling it what you want it to do. So instead, I would sit with that piece of cake and I would say, you know what? What I want is I want to enjoy this. I want to enjoy this. I want to know that I am fully consciously aware that this is not the most nutritious choice I could be choosing. And I am going to enjoy this. Period. Not without any repercussions. No. I'm going to enjoy this. And I'm going to let this be all that it is, diffuse it of all the power that it had of adding 5 pounds, of taking away my career, of like all the other bullshit beliefs that I had added onto like a freaking piece of cake. And instead just say, I'm going to enjoy this. This is a moment that I get to enjoy. And I'm going to allow myself to have this. I'm giving myself full conscious permission, presence to this moment of enjoying this. And that is how I started stopping myself from devouring the entire cake because I would be present with it. I wouldn't use that cake or that pint of ice cream to numb out. I would be present with the choice that I was making and say, this is the choice that I'm making. And I'm going to consume this. I'm going to enjoy this and enjoy it until I am full of enjoyment, and enjoy it until I'm no longer experiencing the enjoyment. Because nobody enjoys getting, like, really on a deep level, nobody enjoys getting to that point where they're bursting at the seams, feel like they have to unbutton their pants, need to put on sweatpants, like having the sweats coming down because you've eaten too much. Nobody enjoys that. No. But people are conditioned, like, our bodies, a lot of times we don't know when we are full, because we haven't trained our bodies to be full, like really full, like, and what is full, not stuffed, big right. Difference.
Yeah.
And training ourselves to have presence with our food, and training ourselves to have that presence and that moment and that gratitude with what it is that we're eating and with what it is that we're choosing into eating. And the more I own the fact that I was making that a conscious choice to do that, to eat that, to be in that moment with that food, it changed the game for how I perceive the food.
Makes sense. I'm going to have to wrap us up because
yeah,
I'm out of time. But what I want to ask you is, if somebody's out there who is bulimic now, what advice would you give them today that would help them to come back to a place of normalcy with their relationship with food and with themselves?
Yeah. So I will say this, I'm not a medical professional, and right. I only say this out of my own personal experience. So if you are bulimic, like, I do not recommend, doing it the way that I did and just struggling silently and alone. What started for me was accepting where I was, and part of that acceptance was also telling people and letting people know that I was struggling. And that can turn into telling a therapist, that can turn into telling your parents or your family or your spouse or your partner. But it started with that awareness of knowing and being in that moment of accepting the fact that I was that way, and that didn't mean that I was going to stay that way. And that meant that I would start on the quest to looking for new answers. And so if you are in that space, what I would say, not as a medical health professional, but just as a friend would be to just allow yourself to share that, to be honest, to be open about it, to be vulnerable. Because a lot of times that, for me at least, that bulimia was a mask for my own stuff that I hadn't yet dealt with. And it opening up and accepting is like peeling back that first layer of the onion so that you can get to the core.
Right. And to understand why you're doing it.
And to understand, and to start to understand and start to question the behavior. Question, why am I doing this? Question, and ask yourself, like, what, and one of my favorite questions, because why is an okay question, but a what question or a how question will give you strategy. And so asking the question, what triggered this? What was the emotion that I was feeling that this was compensating for? And then allowing yourself to first accept it and communicate it and start questioning. Question the pattern. And through questioning and questioning without judgment. It's not questioning like, oh, I'm such an idiot, da 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 da, why would I ever do this? No, it's questioning almost like an anthropologist would, of saying, okay, well, that's interesting, that happened. Accepting it without judgment. And then moving forward from there to the space of, okay, well, what triggered that? What was I feeling? What were the emotions that I was doing before I was eating? What was there, a friend that I talked to, or a conversation that I had, or anxiety that I was feeling, or what were the feelings that I was feeling? So you can start identifying those emotional triggers. So because to get to the root of what's causing the emotion instead of masking the emotion with the bulimia. Right. And so that was what would be what I would say to a friend.
Yeah, that's very wise advice. Well, I love having you here. We could talk for another hour easily.
We could, Cheryl. You and I are talkers. I can tell.
This has been great, and I really appreciate you coming and sharing your story. And I think one of the things that's the big takeaway is that you have moved completely past it, so that people listening, if they do have the issue of bulimia, they can have hope that they too can get their self-worth and move past it to a wonderful life of their own that is self-aware and that is accomplishing everything that they want to accomplish in their life. That's something that can be in their past, and you are an example of that. So thank you. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for having me. And yeah, please reach out if this episode was valuable for you. You can find me on Instagram at kimberly.spenser, or if for any tools or resources, or if you're interested in pre-ordering my book, which is coming out this year, then you can head over to my website at crownyourself.com and look at any resources.
Underneath, when I explain what the episode's about, I'll let everybody know how to reach you.
Perfect.
It's important that they know how to reach you.
Yeah, reach out to me. And if you're struggling, with your body image, or, how do I work out, or what kind of questions should I ask myself? Like, just reach out. I'm happy to help and point you in the right direction, and also point you in the right direction of a couple great therapists as well that have had, that are friends and colleagues of mine that I am happy to also refer out to. I'm like a connection queen. So that's my jam, is connecting people with the resources and tools that can move you further forward faster. And if that's coaching, then rock on. If that's therapy, then rock on. If that's a book or a tool or a resource or something that I have, then I'm happy to share that.
Right. That's fantastic. Okay. Thank you. Delightful. So happy to have you here.
Delightful, Cheryl.